My daughter's husband called me the maid in front of his parents. I gave him the house keys and told him to handle the mortgage himself. Before I share my full story, let me know where you're watching from and make sure to like the video to support me. I sat in the living room, looking out the window. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the street. But inside, I felt cold. My name is Helen Thompson. I am 68 years old, and I am a widow. For many years, I lived in this house with my daughter Emily and her family. It was a busy place, always filled with noise and activity. I cooked meals, cleaned rooms, and took care of my grandchildren. I loved them all, but sometimes I felt like I was fading into the background. One day, we had a family gathering. It was supposed to be a happy time. Emily's husband, Mark, had invited his parents over. We all sat around the table, eating and talking. I was serving dessert when Mark spoke up. He laughed and said something that cut deep. He called me the maid in front of everyone. His parents laughed too, thinking it was a joke. But it was no joke to me. It felt like a slap in the face. I tried to smile, to act like it didn't bother me. But inside, I was hurting. I had spent years caring for them, and this was how I was seen. Like I was just part of the furniture. I looked at Emily, hoping she would say something. But she just looked away, busy with the kids. It was like she didn't even notice. After everyone left, I sat alone in the kitchen. The words kept echoing in my mind. The maid. I never thought of myself like that, but maybe that's what I had become. I had lost myself in the process of taking care of everyone else. I realized I had made myself small, so small that I was invisible. The next morning, I woke up with a new sense of determination. I knew I had to make a change. I needed to show them that I was more than just a helper. I took the house keys and handed them to Mark. I told him it was his turn to look after things. I saw the surprise in his eyes, but I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked away, my heart pounding. As I walked down the street, I thought about my life. I had always been the one to step in, to fill the gaps, to make sure everything ran smoothly. But in doing so, I had let my own needs slip away. I had forgotten who I was outside of being a mother and a grandmother. I had let myself become a shadow in my own life. I ended up at a small cafe. It was quiet inside, with only a few people around. I ordered a cup of tea and sat by the window. I watched people pass by, each one with their own story. I thought about mine. How did I get here? How did I let myself be treated like a maid in my own home? As I sipped my tea, an old friend walked in. Martha was her name. We hadn't seen each other in years. She spotted me and came over. We talked for a while. I told her about the incident, about how I felt invisible. She listened quietly, nodding. Then she said something that stuck with me. She said I needed to take some time for myself, to figure out what I truly wanted. Her words were simple, but they hit home. I realized I had been living for others for so long that I didn't even know what I wanted anymore. I had forgotten my own dreams and passions. It was time to remember. I needed to change. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and made a list. It was a list of things I wanted to do. Simple things, like painting, reading, and taking walks. Things that would make me feel alive again. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Change never is. But I also knew it was necessary. I thought about Emily and Mark. I knew they would struggle without me. They were used to having me there, doing everything. But they needed to learn to manage on their own. It was time for them to take responsibility. As I wrote my list, I felt a mix of emotions. There was a part of me that felt guilty for leaving them to fend for themselves. But there was also a part that felt excited. I was taking the first step towards reclaiming my life. I looked around the quiet house. It felt different now. Less like a place I was trapped in and more like a place where I could start anew. I was ready to find myself again, to be more than just a background figure. The next day, I woke up early. The house was still and quiet. It felt strange not to have the usual rush of family demands. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. I felt a sense of calm. It was the start of something new. I knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges ahead, both for me and for my family. But I also knew it was worth it. I needed to show them, and myself, that I was more than just the maid. I was Helen Thompson, a woman with her own dreams and desires. As I watched the sun rise, I felt a spark of hope. It was time to step out of the shadows and into the light. Time to find out who I really was, beyond the roles I had played for so long. And so began my journey to reclaim my life. The morning after I handed Mark the keys felt different. I woke up to a quiet house. There was no rush to make breakfast, no calls for help from Emily or the kids. It was just me. I felt a strange mix of freedom and uncertainty. I knew this was the start of a new chapter, but I wasn't sure what would come next. I decided to take a walk. The neighborhood was peaceful, the air crisp and fresh. As I walked, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. I was free to choose my own path, at least for now. I didn't have to worry about anyone else. It was a liberating feeling, but also a little scary. I was stepping into the unknown. I wandered into a small cafe I had passed many times before but never entered. The bell above the door jingled as I walked in. The place was cozy, with a few tables and a friendly barista at the counter. I ordered a coffee and sat down by the window. It felt good to just sit and watch the world go by without any obligations. As I sipped my coffee, I saw a familiar face walk in. It was Martha, my old friend. Seeing her felt like a sign. We hadn't spoken in years, but she greeted me with a warm smile. She sat across from me, and we talked. I told her about what happened with Mark and how I had decided to step back. She listened, nodding, her eyes full of understanding. Martha said I needed to take some time for myself. She told me to rediscover what made me happy, to find out what I wanted from life. Her words made sense. I realized I had been living for others for so long that I didn't even know what made me happy anymore. I thanked her for listening and for her advice. That night, I went home and looked at the list I had made. It was full of things I used to love but had forgotten about. Painting, reading, taking long walks. Simple things that brought me joy. I decided it was time to start doing them again. It was time to focus on me. Over the next few days, I tried to stick to my list. I took up painting again, something I hadn't done in years. I would spend hours at the kitchen table, brush in hand, lost in the colors and strokes. It felt wonderful to create something, to express myself without words. I also joined a book club at the local library. It was nice to meet new people, to share thoughts about stories and characters. I found myself looking forward to those meetings. It was a chance to be part of something, to connect with others who shared my interests. As I embraced these new activities, I felt a sense of fulfillment I hadn't felt in years. I realized that I had more to offer than just my domestic skills. I was more than a caretaker. I was a person with my own passions and dreams. It was a revelation. But along with the joy came moments of doubt. There were times when I felt guilty for leaving Emily and her family to manage on their own. I worried about them, about how they were coping without me. But I reminded myself that they needed to learn to stand on their own 2 feet. It was important for them, just as it was important for me. One evening, as I was cleaning up after painting, I heard a knock on the door. It was Emily. She looked tired, her eyes heavy with stress. She told me they were struggling to keep up with everything. She said it was hard to manage the house, the kids, and work without my help. I listened quietly. I understood her frustration, but I also knew I couldn't go back to the way things were. I explained that I needed this time for myself, to find out who I was outside of being their support. Emily looked at me, a mix of emotions on her face. She was upset, but I also saw a glimmer of understanding. It was a difficult conversation. I knew she felt like I had abandoned them, but I also knew this was something I had to do. I needed to reclaim my life, to set boundaries that would allow me to be more than just a helper. After Emily left, I sat alone in the quiet house. I thought about our conversation and the tension that lay beneath it. I knew it would take time for her to understand my decision fully. But I hoped that one day she would see why it was necessary. In the meantime, I continued to explore my independence. I spent more time at the community center, meeting new people and trying new things. Each day felt like a step forward, a step towards finding myself again. The more I embraced this new chapter, the more I realized how much I had lost over the years. But instead of feeling sad about it, I felt hopeful. I was on a journey to rediscover who I was, and it was a journey I was grateful to be on. I knew there would be challenges ahead, both for me and for my family. But I also knew that I was strong enough to face them. I was more than just a background figure in someone else's life. I was Helen Thompson, and I was finally living for myself. The days moved on, and I found myself growing more comfortable with my new life. I was discovering parts of myself that I had long forgotten. Each morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose that was fresh and exciting. I was no longer just existing for others. I was living for myself. I joined the local community center, where I signed up for a painting class. It was a small group of people, all eager to learn and express themselves. Our teacher, a kind woman named Sarah, encouraged us to explore different styles. She said art was about finding our voice. I liked that idea. It resonated with me because I was trying to find my voice in life too. The first few classes were a bit overwhelming. It had been so long since I had painted with others. But as I dipped my brush into the colors, I felt a familiar joy return. I watched the paint come to life on the canvas, forming shapes and telling stories. It was like rediscovering an old friend. The people in the class were welcoming. We shared stories about our lives, our struggles, and our dreams. It felt good to be part of a group where I wasn't defined by my family roles. I was just Helen, an artist finding her way. We laughed and supported each other, and those afternoons became a highlight of my week. At the same time, I joined a book club at the library. Each week, we read a different book and discussed it together. I enjoyed diving into new stories and hearing different perspectives. The discussions were lively, sometimes even heated, but always respectful. It was a reminder that there was a world beyond my home, full of ideas and possibilities. Through these activities, I began to form new friendships. I met people who shared my interests, who saw me for who I was, not just what I did for others. It was refreshing and empowering. I was building a life outside of my family, and it felt good. One day, Sarah approached me after class. She said there was an opportunity to showcase our paintings at a local art exhibit. She encouraged me to submit my work. At first, I hesitated. The idea of displaying my art to the public was daunting. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I wanted to do it. It was a chance to show the world who I was becoming. I chose a few pieces that I was proud of. They were simple, but each one held a piece of my journey. I wanted to share that with others, to show that it was never too late to find yourself. The exhibit was set for the following month, and I felt a mix of excitement and nerves as the date approached. As I immersed myself in painting and reading, I began to feel a sense of fulfillment that had been missing for so long. I was doing things that brought me joy, things that made me feel alive. I realized I had more to offer than just being a caretaker. I was more than the roles I had played for others. But despite my progress, there were moments of doubt. Sometimes, late at night, I would lay awake thinking about Emily and her family. I wondered how they were managing without me. I felt a pang of guilt for leaving them to handle things on their own. But I reminded myself that they needed to learn to manage. It was important for their growth, and for mine too. One afternoon, as I was leaving the community center, I ran into Mark. He looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from juggling too many things at once. He asked if we could talk, and I agreed. We sat on a bench outside, the sun warm on our faces. Mark admitted that things had been tough. Without my help, they were struggling to keep up with everything. He said he hadn't realized how much I did for them until I stepped back. I listened, feeling a mix of emotions. It was good to hear him acknowledge my efforts, but it also brought back the hurt from his earlier words. I told him that I needed to focus on myself for a while. I wasn't abandoning them, but I was setting boundaries. It was time for them to take responsibility and for me to pursue my own path. Mark nodded, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. He apologized for the way he had treated me, and I could see he meant it. After our talk, I felt a sense of relief. It wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a step forward. I hoped that Emily and Mark would find their way, just as I was finding mine. I wanted them to succeed, to grow stronger together. But I also knew that I couldn't sacrifice myself in the process. The weeks leading up to the exhibit flew by. I spent hours in my little makeshift studio, painting and preparing. Each brushstroke felt like a step towards reclaiming myself. I was nervous about the exhibit, but I was also proud. Proud of how far I had come, proud of the person I was becoming. Finally, the day of the exhibit arrived. The community center was filled with people, all eager to see the art. I stood by my paintings, watching as visitors stopped to look. Some paused to chat, others just admired quietly. I felt exposed but also validated. My work, my story, was out there for others to see. Emily and Mark came with the kids. They walked through the exhibit, stopping at each painting. I could see the surprise and admiration in their eyes. It was a moment of connection, a bridge between the old and the new. I realized then that this was just the beginning. There was still much to learn, much to explore. As the evening came to a close, I felt a sense of peace. I had taken a risk, and it had paid off. I was living my life for myself, on my own terms. It was a journey I was grateful to be on, and I was excited to see where it would lead. I was no longer just a background figure. I was Helen Thompson, and I was finding my place in the world. The art exhibit had been a turning point for me. It felt good to share my work with others, to see people appreciate what I had created. But as I settled back into my routine, the challenges of my new life began to surface. I was finding my way, but my family was struggling without my constant presence. Emily and Mark were having a hard time managing everything. I could see it in their faces whenever I visited. The house was often messy, the kids seemed stressed, and there was a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. It was clear that they hadn't fully adjusted to handling things on their own. One day, Emily called me. Her voice was tense, and I could hear the frustration boiling over. She said they were overwhelmed with the responsibilities of the house and the kids. She accused me of abandoning them, of causing unnecessary hardship. Her words stung, but I listened quietly. I knew she was speaking from a place of stress and exhaustion. When she finished, I took a deep breath. I explained to her, once again, that I needed this time for myself. I was not abandoning them, but I was setting boundaries. I told her it was important for them to learn how to manage without relying on me for everything. It was a hard conversation, filled with emotion, but it was necessary. Emily didn't respond right away. There was a long pause, and I could almost hear her thoughts racing. I hoped she would understand, but I knew it would take time. She finally said she needed to go and hung up. I sat there for a while, the phone still in my hand, feeling the weight of our conversation. The tension between us lingered. Emily and Mark were used to having me there, smoothing out the rough edges of their lives. Now, they had to navigate those challenges on their own. It was difficult for them, but it was a necessary step. They needed to learn responsibility, and I needed to reclaim my life. Despite the strain in my relationship with Emily, I continued to focus on my new activities. My painting and book club brought me joy and fulfillment. I was making progress, both in my art and in my personal growth. I was learning to value myself beyond the roles I had played for others. But there were moments when doubt crept in. I wondered if I was being selfish, if I was causing more harm than good by stepping back. I missed my grandchildren, missed the chaos of a full house. But I reminded myself that this was a necessary journey. I needed to find a balance between caring for my family and nurturing my own needs. One afternoon, I received a message from Emily. She wanted to meet for coffee. I agreed, hoping it would be a chance to bridge the gap between us. We met at a small cafe, a neutral ground where we could talk openly. Emily looked tired, her eyes shadowed with worry. We talked about the challenges they were facing. Emily admitted that things had been tough without my help. She said she hadn't realized how much I did until it was no longer there. I listened, understanding her struggle. But I also knew that I couldn't go back to being their safety net. I explained to Emily that my decision to step back wasn't about abandoning them. It was about finding myself again. I needed this time to rediscover who I was outside of being a caretaker. Emily listened, and I could see her starting to understand. It was a small step, but it was significant. As we talked, I realized how important it was to set boundaries. It was difficult, but it was necessary for both of us. Emily needed to learn to manage her own life, and I needed to live mine. It was a lesson in growth and self-discovery for both of us. After our conversation, I felt a sense of relief. It wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a step towards healing. I hoped that, over time, Emily would come to see my decision as a positive change for both of us. We both needed to learn to stand on our own. As I continued my journey, I focused on building a life that was fulfilling and meaningful. I spent time painting, reading, and exploring new interests. I was learning to enjoy my own company, to appreciate the quiet moments that were just for me. But I also knew that family was important. I wanted to be part of their lives, but in a way that respected my own needs. It was a delicate balance, one that I was still learning to navigate. I hoped that, in time, we would find a way to come together that honored both our needs. The journey was far from over, but I was committed to seeing it through. I was learning to live for myself, to embrace who I was outside of the roles I had played for so long. It was a journey of self-discovery, growth, and hope. I was Helen Thompson, and I was finally finding my own way. The days slowly turned into weeks, and I began to notice small changes in my relationship with Emily. Our conversations became more frequent, and the tension that had been there before started to ease. It was as if the distance had allowed us both to see things more clearly. Emily was beginning to understand my perspective, and I was learning to see hers. One afternoon, Emily called to invite me over for dinner. It had been a while since I had been to their house, and I was curious to see how they were managing. When I arrived, I was greeted by the familiar chaos of a family home. The kids were running around, full of energy and life. It was comforting in a way, a reminder of the life I had stepped back from. Emily and I sat in the kitchen, talking while she prepared the meal. She seemed more relaxed, more confident in her role as a mother and a wife. She told me about the changes they had made, how they were learning to manage their responsibilities better. It was clear that they were finding their footing, even without my constant presence. As we talked, Mark joined us. He was more subdued than usual, his demeanor thoughtful. He admitted that he had been wrong to dismiss my contributions, wrong to take me for granted. His apology felt sincere, and I appreciated his honesty. It was a moment of healing, a step towards rebuilding the trust that had been broken. Dinner was a lively affair. The kids chattered excitedly about school and friends, their laughter filling the room. It felt good to be part of their lives again, to see them growing and thriving. I realized that stepping back had not only allowed me to find myself but had also given them the space to grow. After dinner, Emily and I sat together while the kids played. She spoke about how she had been reflecting on our relationship, on the sacrifices I had made over the years. She told me she finally understood why I needed to step back, why it was important for me to reclaim my life. Her words were a balm to my heart, a sign that we were on the path to healing. We talked late into the evening, sharing memories and hopes for the future. Emily expressed her desire to rebuild our relationship, to find a new way to connect that honored both our needs. We agreed to work on rebuilding trust and communication, to be more open with each other about our feelings. In the following weeks, I noticed a change in Mark too. He was more attentive, more present in the day-to-day tasks of family life. He was learning to share the load, to be a true partner to Emily. It was a relief to see them working together, to see them respecting each other's contributions. Through these changes, I continued to focus on my own journey. I spent time with my new friends, painting and discussing books. I felt more confident and empowered in my identity, more sure of who I was and what I wanted. It was a balance I was learning to navigate, one that brought me a sense of peace. The more I embraced this new chapter, the more I realized how important it was to set boundaries. It was a lesson I wished I had learned earlier, but I was grateful to be learning it now. It was a reminder that I was more than the roles I had played for others. I was Helen Thompson, a woman with her own dreams and aspirations. One weekend, Emily and I decided to spend a day together, just the two of us. We went to a nearby park, walking and talking, enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company. It was a chance to reconnect, to strengthen the bond that had been strained but never broken. As we walked, Emily talked about her hopes for the future. She wanted to continue growing as a person, to find her own passions outside of being a mother and a wife. I encouraged her, sharing the joy I had found in my own journey of self-discovery. It was heartening to see her eager to explore her own path. Our conversations were honest and open, a reflection of the trust we were rebuilding. I realized that this was what I had been missing, this level of connection and understanding. It was a reminder of the importance of communication, of being honest with ourselves and each other. In the months that followed, our relationship continued to grow stronger. We were learning to respect each other's boundaries, to appreciate each other's contributions. It was a new dynamic, one that was more balanced and fulfilling. I felt hopeful for the future, for the family we were rebuilding. Mark, too, was changing. He was more involved, more supportive of Emily and the kids. He had learned from his mistakes, and it showed in the way he treated those around him. I was proud of the progress they had made, proud of the family they were becoming. As I continued on my own journey, I found joy in my art and new friendships. I felt more content and fulfilled than I had in years. I was living my life for myself, embracing who I was and who I wanted to be. It was a journey I was grateful to be on, one that brought me peace and happiness. The journey was not without its challenges, but I was learning to navigate them with grace and resilience. I was finding my place in the world, a place that honored both my needs and the needs of those I loved. It was a balance I was still learning to maintain, but it was a journey worth taking. I knew that the road ahead would not always be easy, but I was ready to face it with courage and hope. I was Helen Thompson, and I was living my life on my own terms, surrounded by a family that was learning to do the same. It was a new beginning, a second chance, and I was grateful for every moment. Life at home began to find a new rhythm. Emily and Mark were working together better than ever. They had learned to balance their responsibilities, and it showed in the way their household ran. They shared chores, took turns with the kids, and worked as a team. I could see the change in them, and it was heartening. Emily seemed more relaxed, more at ease with her role as a mother and wife. She had started exploring her own interests, taking a photography class, something she had always wanted to do. It made me happy to see her growing, finding a balance between family and personal fulfillment. Mark, too, had grown. He was more involved with the kids, more present in their lives. He was learning to appreciate the small moments, the everyday joys of family life. It was a transformation that brought them closer as a couple and as a family. I continued with my own pursuits, finding joy in my art and friendships. I felt more alive and engaged with the world around me. My days were filled with activities that brought me happiness and a sense of purpose. I was living my life on my own terms, and it felt wonderful. Despite the changes, I remained a part of Emily's family, but in a different way. I was no longer the person they relied on for everything. I was a mother and grandmother who was there to support and love them, but also someone with her own life and dreams. It was a balance that worked for all of us. The relationship with my grandchildren also shifted in a positive way. With Emily and Mark more present, I was able to spend quality time with them without feeling like their primary caretaker. We enjoyed simple things together, like baking cookies, playing in the park, or reading stories. These moments were precious, and I cherished them. One day, while we were at the park, my eldest grandchild, Lily, asked me about my paintings. She wanted to know what inspired me, what made me paint. Her curiosity made me smile. I explained that painting was a way for me to express myself, to tell stories through colors and shapes. She listened intently, her eyes wide with wonder. Lily's interest in my art sparked something new. She wanted to paint with me, to learn how to create her own art. We started spending afternoons together, painting in my little studio. It was a joy to share this part of my life with her, to see her creativity bloom. As the weeks passed, the family dynamic continued to evolve. We all learned to respect each other's space and boundaries. Emily and Mark appreciated the new balance, and I felt more connected to them than ever before. It was a relationship built on mutual respect and understanding. One evening, we gathered for a family dinner at my house. It was a simple affair, just us enjoying a meal together. As we sat around the table, I looked at each of them, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. We had come a long way from where we started, and it was a journey worth celebrating. During dinner, Emily shared a story about her photography class. She talked about a project she was working on, capturing everyday moments in a way that told a story. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and I felt proud of her for pursuing something she loved. Mark talked about his latest project at work, and the kids shared stories from school. We laughed, talked, and enjoyed each other's company. It was a reminder of how far we had come, of the changes we had made to create a more balanced and fulfilling life. As the evening drew to a close, Emily and I sat together on the porch, watching the stars. She thanked me for the changes I had made, for stepping back and allowing them to grow. She admitted it had been hard at first, but she was grateful for the lessons learned. We talked about the future, about the hopes and dreams we had for ourselves and our family. It was a conversation filled with warmth and understanding, a reflection of the trust we had rebuilt. I felt hopeful for the road ahead, for the new chapter we were writing together. The days that followed were filled with small joys. I continued to paint, to read, to explore the world around me. I was living a life that was full and rich, a life that honored both my needs and the needs of those I loved. Emily and Mark continued to grow, to build a life that was balanced and fulfilling. They were a team, working together to create a home filled with love and respect. I was proud of them, proud of the family we had become. The journey was not without its challenges, but we faced them together. We had learned to communicate, to be honest with each other about our needs and desires. It was a relationship built on trust, one that allowed us to grow and thrive. As I reflected on the changes we had made, I felt a deep sense of peace. I was Helen Thompson, a woman who had found her way, who had reclaimed her life and identity. I was living a life that was authentic and true, a life that was filled with love and hope. The future was bright, and I was ready to embrace it with open arms. I was surrounded by a family that had learned to appreciate each other, to support each other in all the ways that mattered. It was a new beginning, a second chance, and I was grateful for every moment. The journey had been long, but I finally felt at peace. I had reclaimed my life and found balance. I was no longer just a supporting character in my family's story. I was the main character in my own. It felt empowering and right. I had my art, my friends, and, most importantly, a renewed sense of self. A family gathering was planned to celebrate my art exhibit. It was a simple affair, but it meant the world to me. Emily and Mark organized it, inviting family and friends to see my work. I was touched by their effort and felt grateful for their support. The day of the gathering arrived with clear skies and bright sunshine. I set up my paintings around the living room, each one telling a part of my journey. As the guests arrived, I welcomed them warmly, feeling a sense of pride in what I had accomplished. The room buzzed with chatter and laughter. People admired my paintings, asking questions about the inspiration behind each one. It was a joy to share my passion with them, to see their appreciation for my work. It validated the path I had chosen, the changes I had made. Emily stood by my side, beaming with pride. She introduced me to her friends, speaking about my art with enthusiasm. It warmed my heart to see her so supportive, to know she understood the importance of this moment for me. Mark, too, was attentive and engaged. He mingled with the guests, sharing stories about our family and the journey we had been on. He had come a long way, and I was proud of the man he had become. As the afternoon turned into evening, we gathered for a toast. Emily raised her glass, her eyes shining with emotion. She spoke about the changes we had all made, about the strength and courage it took to redefine our lives. Her words were heartfelt, a testament to the journey we had been on together. I looked around the room, at the faces of the people I loved. I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought us here. We had faced challenges, but we had come out stronger, more united. It was a moment of celebration, not just of my art, but of the family we had become. As the gathering wound down, I found a quiet moment to reflect. I thought about the path I had taken, the steps I had made to reclaim my life. I realized that while I would always be a mother and grandmother, I was also Helen Thompson, a woman with her own dreams and aspirations. I felt a sense of fulfillment, a peace that came from living authentically. I had learned to balance my needs with those of my family, to set boundaries that honored both. It was a journey of growth and self-discovery, one that I was grateful to have undertaken. The night ended with hugs and goodbyes, promises to stay connected and support each other. As I watched Emily and Mark leave with the kids, I felt a sense of hope for the future. We had come a long way, and I was excited to see where life would take us next. In the days that followed, I continued to embrace my new life. I painted, read, and spent time with friends. I was living a life that was full and rich, one that honored who I was and who I wanted to be. It was a journey that was far from over, but I was ready to face it with courage and hope. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but I felt prepared to face them. I had learned to trust myself, to listen to my needs and desires. I was Helen Thompson, and I was living my life on my own terms. As I sat on the porch one evening, watching the stars, I felt a deep sense of peace. I realized that the journey was not just about finding myself, but about embracing change and moving forward. It was about living authentically, in a way that honored both my needs and the needs of those I loved. I felt grateful for the lessons learned, for the strength and courage it took to reclaim my life. I was ready to embrace the future with hope and confidence, surrounded by a family that had learned to appreciate and support each other. The journey had been long, but it was worth every step. I was Helen Thompson, and I was finally living the life I had always dreamed of. It was a new beginning, a second chance, and I was grateful for every moment.